Hi, I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream. Today, Muslim Americans who speaks for them when politicians and the press are talking about them. There's such a vibrant conversation online between and about Muslim Americans. We're going to tap into some of that, but really get deep into that conversation if we can. Malika, what do you have?
Well, it behooves us to start with this tweet from Dilshad, who is a Muslim American and a former AJ Stream guest. She says, I think we should start by saying Muslims are not a monolith. No one person or group speaks for us. Diversity is key. So with that in mind, we're going to have a diverse panel on the show today, and we want that to include your own feedback. So tweet us with hashtag AJ Stream.
Hi, I'm Laura Zahra McDonald. I'm Director of Connect Justice, and I'm in the stream.
US press coverage of Muslim affairs often focuses on violent interpretations of Islam.
I want surveillance of certain mosques, okay?
It's not about closing down mosques. It's about closing down any place, whether it's a cafe, a diner, an internet site, any place where radicals are being inspired.
I would not advocate that we put a Muslim in charge of this nation. I absolutely would not.
So these kind of conversations can make it really hard to hear Muslim Americans reflecting on their faith. But if you listened, who would you hear? With 2.7 million Muslims in the United States, the community is as diverse as the country: Black, white, Asian, Latino, US and foreign-born. So when crisis hits, who speaks for Muslim communities? And when they do, who are they leaving out? With us to talk about this in Chicago, Suad Abdul-Kabir is an activist, artist and assistant professor of anthropology at Purdue University. Also in Chicago, Samar Kokab is on the advisory board of Aut Muslima. That's a media community dedicated to discussing gender in Islam. In New York, Ibrahim Abdul-Martin is the author of Green Deen, What Islam Teaches About Protecting the Planet. And in Santa Clara, California, Zara Bilou is a spokesperson for the civil rights group Council on American and Islamic Relations, or CARE. Good to have you here, everybody. So, Suad, first of all, is there a crisis in America where Muslims are having to rally around and put their voices out there?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say yes, there's a crisis, in so much as that, you know, there is the mainstream media in the United States has a particular agenda, and it's not really about sort of elevating Muslim voices in particular, and specifically the diversity of Muslim voices. And so I think what you hear, I think there was a study recently about sort of the how much news we get about Donald Trump, right, in comparison to other political candidates, for example, right? And so if someone like Donald Trump is getting the airtime, right, and he's, you know, sort of ramping up and reiterating and sort of giving us all this anti-Muslim talk, right, then that's what people are going to be hearing, as opposed to hearing what Muslims themselves have to say about themselves, and not just who they are, but what they think about the country and its future.
Why is that happening, Ibrahim?
I mean, I don't even know. You say, are we having a crisis, or is it? I think the entire country's having a crisis. You have riots that are and protests that are going on in almost every major city. You have an ongoing active rebellion happening in the Pacific Northwest, where white separatists or libertarian armed citizens are taking over public land. I think our country's been having a crisis. It's an experiment. America is an experiment in governance. It's not the end-all and be-all of like the best way to govern human beings. And so this country exists consistently in a state of crisis, especially when you have taken it over from people who lived here before. So a lot of, you know, it's not, so American Muslims into this space where there was always where there was consistently crisis, we are at a crisis point as well. African-American Muslims, we're hurt, we're broken, we have a lot of trauma, there's a lot of psychological issues, there's homelessness that's rampant. I think it's pretty clear that if the entire country's in crisis and we're part of the country, yes, we're in crisis.
So Samar, when that happens, and I feel that Suad and Ibrahim are feeling like, yeah, not just American Muslims, but the entire country, who then steps up and speaks for American Muslims?
Well, I think that's a really good question. And I think that, so one of the issues that we're dealing with, whether we're talking about American society at large or Muslim Americans, is the difficulty people have with dealing with ambiguity. Research tells us that people don't usually do well with uncertainty or ambiguity. And when it comes to this question of who speaks for us, I think who speaks for us are people who can help us sort out dealing with complex subjects, people from the community, of the community, who really kind of organically have a voice and provide a narrative that helps us bring kind of some order to chaos and complexity.
You know, one of the things people online are saying to us is on that question of who speaks for Muslims, a lot of times it looks like this. This is one example Hasib on Twitter shared with us. He says, unless I'm mistaken, I find it ironic that not a single Muslim academic or scholar is mentioned on this list in the Huffington Post website as an expert on ISIS. It was an article about the rise of ISIS and who to follow online if you wanted to know more. And he goes on to say there's no mentions of academics or scholars. So that's one prong of this debate. The other prong is, well, you might have some non-Muslims speaking on behalf of the community. When you do have Muslims, they're not necessarily representative of the community. Zahra, do you want to toss out those reasonings behind those two prongs of what people online are critiquing?
So it's challenging, right? My first response to the question was, we speak for ourselves. And so there are some people in the community who are developing careers as spokespeople who do this full time. Either they're funded by the outside, they're funded by the inside, they get invited back because they've got relationships or it's something that they do well. Sometimes people get invited back because they don't do well and they fit into a narrative. And so it's hard to say who's exactly representative of the community when it is such a diverse community.
But can I step in there for a second about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You just did.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, so I just wanted to say, I think,
it's totally okay.
Right. Earlier, I mean, when they asked this question, like, who has the right to speak for American Muslims, right? And of course, everyone has the right to speak for the community because the community is diverse. But I think part of what that tweet is about, too, is this idea that at the same time, we want people who can speak, and I think Summer was alluding to this, from a space of expertise. So not just on their personal experience, right? Their idiosyncratic individual experience, but they actually have maybe done some work on something, right? So they've studied, I don't know, gender relations in mosques in the United States, right, for 10 years. And so if you want to ask somebody what they think about that, maybe you don't ask the random Muslim woman on the street, right? Or you ask her, but in addition to her, you also ask that person who studied that for 10 years.
So
right?
is that happening? I think guests are being very polite right now. They're dancing around specific examples. And let's stop dancing, let's start giving specific examples. Suad?
I want to...
Yeah, or Ibrahim, go ahead, but let's be specific. Yeah, go ahead, Ibrahim.
I just want to dive in and say, who speaks for us? Yeah. Normally, it's the sheer numbers. So you have ICNA, you have ISNA, and CARE to a certain extent, but CARE's role is more reactionary.
All right, so ICNA, Islamic Circle of North America, right?
Correct.
And
Islamic Society of North
America. Okay, and they're important because,
they're the largest, and they were born out of the immigrant experience of people who come from other countries that came to the United States that wanted to find community, and they created institutions that helped them to support them in multiple different ways, professionally, emotionally, spiritually, however, people getting married through them. Those organizations are in my opinion, those organizations have been chosen by the powers that be because they represent large numbers of people, and those organizations are speaking a much more apologetic tone. So, and I'll say this, that the people who, at the ground level, or like, let's say like a Daoud Walid, who's part of CARE up in Michigan, or like a Linda Sarsour, or like a Suad, there's certain people who are engaged in a conversation around our relationship as Muslims to racism, classism, sexism, these larger issues that the society is facing. They are not elevated all the time as the main voices because we're not sort of in that quiet, calm position. So my argument is that who speaks for us is two groups. People who are doing the work speak for us, but their voices don't get elevated. And then there's people who are just like, we represent lots of people, and and people want us to want those groups to speak for them.
So can I push back?
No, I'm going to jump in. Like that, I mean, with all due respect, I don't think it's fair to say that Linda and Dawood don't get elevated, because they do. They're among the most visible Muslim spokespeople in the country. And I don't think it's fair to say that ICNA and ISNA don't do the work, right? They are feeding homeless people. They are building women's shelters. Their credibility is derived from their large membership base. And then, of course, this issue of the powers that be. ISNA gets invited to the White House. ICNA, not so much. So, like, who are these powers that be? It's not that they're all treated the same way.
And I'm just to kind of add on to Sarah's point right there, is it's one of the things I think that we're struggling with as well as a community are organizations or individuals who claim to be speaking for the Muslim American experience. You know, we just spoke about how diverse the community is. We're racially diverse, ethnically diverse, class, social, everything. And so when you have, whether it's an organization or an individual who's saying, I speak for Muslim Americans, right then and there, I don't buy it. And so I think that's one of the things we're not saying out loud.
But I think
I agree with Summer.
Summer, actually, the point that you raised, and so I'll give it to you, because I know you're trying to speak now, but I want to just pivot off of what Summer said, because we got a video comment that pretty much echoed what she said. I want you to have a listen to what Harris said about being that diverse community.
There's something very beautiful about the diversity within the American Muslim population. And the richness of this diversity is choked when the American Muslim narrative is confined to just one group or voice. We have to understand the history of Muslim groups in the United States and amplify the voices and works of different Muslim groups in order to unite and show our fellow Americans that we are devout Muslims and loyal Americans, and we are here to build bridges and our communities together.
So, Suad, do you think there are certain groups who aren't given that platform?
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, I think definitely groups like ISNA, ICNA do work. And so I don't think anyone denies that. But we have to keep it 100, right? So the president calls them, right? Because they also, not only do they speak to the powers that be, specifically the state power in specific ways, but they also fit a profile, right? They sort of put this immigrant sort of striving profile. And so that's something that I think fits what, you know, Muslims have to be foreign in order for Muslims to, the anti-Muslim rhetoric to continue itself. And so I think, you know, Minister Louis Farrakhan, you know, they just had the 20th anniversary of the Million Man March, right? How many hundreds of thousands of Black people, Muslim and non-Muslim, does Minister Louis Farrakhan bring to D.C.? When's the last time he got invited to the White House, right? So it's not just about being representative of large constituents, right? It's also about fitting a particular profile that's amenable to those in power, right? And that profile is of those Muslims who have sort of immigrated to this country. They're upwardly mobile. You know, they do sort of a immigrant model minority respectability. They do that well, and then they get access to power. Right. And I think that, sorry.
Right, so
I get exhausted.
This is what I hear. Ibrahim has still not answered who are the powers to be. And Zara asked you very specifically, who are these powers to be that you feel are drawing on specific voices? Who are they?
I get exhausted by this conversation of like, oh, we're Americans and we're loyal and we love this country, and this whole sort of like kumbaya thing. Yeah. People came to this country to make money. They came to this country because they were fleeing persecution. They came to this country for various different reasons. But the primary thing that sets them apart is that most of the people who came to this country that are now elevated in positions of vocal leadership or put in, when I say the powers that be, I mean the media, the people who allow people to have a voice at certain times, the people, political leaders who say, we're going to choose to speak to these leaders over these leaders because these leaders will let us go about our plan and our game plan without being too critical of us, because they're just happy to be at the table. Whereas other folks are like, you know what? We know the history of this place. We know what happened with Native Americans. We know what happened with slavery. We know what happened with all the different waves of immigrants and all the struggles that they face. At some point, the immigrant community, you always hear this conversation around, oh no, everyone had to deal with this difficulty with assimilation. Well, that's not a good model. And that's not something that you should be proud of, to say, I'm going to go through this hard time. I'm getting hazed just like someone would be at a school. I'm going to be beaten just to prove that I'm part of the club. I don't want to be part of that club. And so I think I would.
Oh, sorry, David.
So Summer, go ahead. Ibrahim, take a breath. Summer, go ahead.
So I hear what you're saying, and in many ways, I agree with you. But one of the things that I really hear you also doing is creating the immigrant community, which is also incredibly diverse, comes from different socioeconomic backgrounds, and came in different waves in terms of immigration to this country. And you're painting them in broad strokes in terms of, if a Muslim has a seat at the proverbial table, that they're not representing difficult issues. They're not bringing difficult issues to that table. They're not talking in an assimilation story. They're talking in an immigration story. And so I am, kind of pushing back on, you are also stereotyping the immigrant experience while you're saying that.
Of course I'm stereotyping. That's obvious. I'm not denying stereotyping anybody. That's clear. I mean, I think that's a normal thing.
Let me show you something,
do.
guests and audience here. This is an iftar dinner. President Obama is here, and this dinner is part of breaking the fast during Ramadan. Why would this iftar dinner be controversial? Why would people be upset about this? Because they didn't get an invite to the White House? Is that why? I mean, I'm actually sitting next to somebody who's been to the iftar dinner.
No, never.
Yeah, I've seen you in the White House once.
Luckily, no. My activist friends would
not allow you to go.
Would not allow me to go.
What's the problem with going to this?
Well, I heard laughter in the group, Swad. You were laughing at that.
Yes, I was, because I think some people might have felt salty they didn't get an invite, but I think the real issue here is about what does it mean to have dinner with the president when, President Obama has deported sort of more people, sort of in his tenure than previous presidents, when drones are dropping on people all over the world, so there's kind of really significant and serious issues that are facing Muslim communities. And it's like, is dinner with the White House, does that mean you're sort of co-signing and saying you're okay with these policies, right? Okay. Is that what you're doing? And so I think that was the question people had, right? If people who go and spend time and sit with the president for iftar to break their fast in Ramadan, do they then become complicit, right, in U.S. empire, in the violence of U.S. empire?
So let me just check. Samar, Zara, Ibrahim, have you been to the iftar dinner? Been to the White House?
I have not.
I would not get invited if I paid for it.
I've got a feeling none of you, after this conversation, will get invited. Never mind, moving on.
I think that is assured. I want to share two things. The first is just to let you know, Ibrahim, this is a tweet we got from Hind in response to a comment you made. She said, my pushback to Ibrahim is that the immigrant community is not monolithic either. But I want to move on just a little bit and share this with Zahra. Zahra, this is a tweet we got from Leanne. She says, my needs, my wants, my outlook aren't traditional Muslim. I get upset when only Arab, South Asian represent us. We need variety. Blacks, Africans, East Europeans, Latinos, converts, handicapped, gays, non-hijabis, non-bearded voices as well.
And that's why I love we're here, because we employ a really diverse group of spokespeople. Like our civil rights coordinator who serves all of Northern California and does media alongside me is a white convert to Islam. Like, I'm hiring as diverse as possible. We're an equal opportunity employer. And so we say, can you speak to the media? Are you comfortable speaking to the media? We put you in training, and then we put you in front of a camera.
Zara, let me play this. This is from December, and this is your organization speaking out against the San Bernardino attacks. Just a couple of seconds here where I know there was some tension, but have a listen to what happened.
On behalf of the American Muslim community, and especially the Southern California Muslim community, on behalf of CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, we unequivocally condemn the horrific act that happened today.
So often I hear either, where is the Muslim community? Where are the Muslims? Why aren't they talking? Why do you even have to be out there, put anyone out there? And then when you do, you get a lot of critique. What kind of criticism did you get for actually putting that press conference out there?
Yeah. It's funny, we can't please anyone. We're having a conversation this afternoon about who speaks for American Muslims and why people issue statements. And there's like a constant stream of people tagging me on Facebook right now because CARE hasn't issued a statement on something Saudi Arabia did. Really can't make everyone happy. In the case of San Bernardino, the LA office, which is the strongest CARE chapter in the country, and if I were to trust anyone with my life, it is CARE LA, made a strategic decision with information that they had access to on the ground about what was necessary to protect the community. People can disagree, and if they do disagree or they don't want CARE LA making those statements, they're more than welcome to contact the media and hold their own press conference, right? And maybe if the argument is don't say anything, then make that pitch to CARE LA. But I would trust them, and they made a strategic decision based on their years of experience.
So
I think one of the issues that a lot of people had with that press conference that I heard and that I shared was that the first statement that you heard coming out of the press conference was on behalf of American Muslims. And so when you do that, you invite the criticism. So I think some of that criticism is fair. You're sitting at that table, you're saying you're speaking on behalf of this incredibly diverse
2.7 million diverse people. Although I can't imagine that there'd be too many people who
wouldn't condemn San Bernardino.
Yeah, but it's kind of obvious.
Right.
And you don't get anybody who's Christian saying, on behalf of Christians in America, I just want to say that this was a terrible thing that happened. All right, so I kind of hear that there's this tension amongst the diversity that makes up Muslim Americans. So in terms of who would you like to be out there talking about issues that are important to Muslim Americans? Ibrahim, I heard your critique. Who would you like to be out there?
You know, I don't really actually care so much per se. I think it's like, this funny thing. Like, you know, I work on environmental issues. I'm slightly obsessed with our relationship to the planet, and I think Muslims and around the globe have been really bad at calling out capitalism and calling out industry's relationship to global climate change. I mean, but I would prefer to hear from experts in that area talking about that. And I think the beauty of the community in the United States is that we are in every field, we are in every industry. So I'm less interested in who's speaking about Muslims as opposed to are Muslims in spaces speaking about what they're experts at. And that's what I'd be much more interested in seeing, is this almost a non-issue. I don't want to hear about, you know, every time there's some Muslim thing, like, no, great. Well, Jahad writes a letter about everything. You know, is he an expert on all of those things?
So Wajahat
like,
is a former colleague of mine. He used to be a co-host on AJAM Stream, so you may remember him from there. Obviously, Ibrahim knows him on the first name terms. No, it's fine. You just can't drop a name in there and expect the entire world to know who it is. Although Wajahat would be very pleased that his name was dropped on the stream. Meanwhile, let me just move on. Malika, what do you have?
Well, Ibrahim was talking about spaces, and one of the spaces is online, which sometimes can be an echo chamber. But this is one of the things that Rama Kudemi is bringing up. She says the Muslim American community often polices itself when it accuses certain activists of creating division in the community when they demand more from Muslim American organizations. So part of this conversation is an airing of dirty laundry, and I don't know if there's a way around that. That's something that you and I were talking about, Femi. This is a talking amongst ourselves in public. I wonder, Summer, what you make of this policing and what happens online, and if that's detrimental or if that's progressive.
So I think one of the things that happens is that we are expanding what it means in terms of our values, the values that we share as American Muslims. Many of those values tend to lie on the more progressive social end. And so one of the fascinating things that's happening online is, while the end are these progressive values, so to say, we're not using the similar values in the process we use to achieve them. And so when you have groups who are saying, you know, who are outing certain Muslims for the views that they hold or for the strategies that they're taking on, and saying, you're not part of the conversation anymore, I don't want to have anything to do with you, that's actually using a policing-oriented
Summer, do you want to give us an example?
process.
Because I know that Muslim Americans who are watching this will know exactly what you're talking about, but give us an example for the rest of us who are watching.
Yeah, sure.
it.
I mean, I hate to bring up the topic of MLI, but I think the boycott that has been around MLI in particular, where certain people...
The Muslim Leadership Initiative, for our audience who's not aware, and the stream did do a show on it.
Yes. So I think that was a great example of a boycott and a debate that was happening within the Muslim American community. And I think there were opinions all over the spectrum. But when you have either end of the spectrum saying, you don't belong, I'm going to boycott you as a person, or I'm going to boycott this particular strategy, not a particular value or a principle, you're actually using, I mean, ironically, that's what Asra Nomani does, which is another great example too, is claiming to be a Muslim woman, and a feminist Muslim woman at that. What she does is she polices the wearing of hijab and turns the hijab into a tool.
And Asra Nomani is a writer and journalist and a really controversial figure in American Muslim communities.
You know, but I would like to add something.
And everybody, I know you all have a point. So we've got Suhad Abdul Kabir, Ibrahim Abdul Mateen, Zara Bilou, and also Sama Kukab. we're taking you to the post show because this is a huge conversation. It's going online at stream.adzero.com. I know that you will follow us there. Let me just check in to see what's been happening online.
There's a good tweet here that I can't find at the moment, but I saw just a second ago where someone says this is a great discussion and they want to have the same one in the UK. So universal application.
All right. All right. Samar, Zara, Suad, Ibrahim, stand by. You're going live online in just a moment. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care. Hello again, you're in the Streams Online Post Show. I'm Femi Oke. We're talking about Muslim Americans and who speaks for them. Nobody needs to speak for Suad and Ibrahim, Zara and Summer. They're doing it beautifully themselves. Where were we before we had to end the program? Who was speaking next? Ibrahim always has his, he always has his mouth open. You start, we'll pick up.
I'll say this.
Yeah, go on.
A lot of times we don't, as a community, and I like those examples that we heard earlier about specific things that American Muslims have put out there and the reactions that have come to them from those moments. Recently, my wife and another, Fatima Ashraf and another contributor, May Al-Hassan, they wrote an article critical of Saudi Arabia that called for a boycott of Hajj. It was very controversial, and it was another example of something that brought in, it showed where people were on a wide spectrum of political views about where that falls in. Another debate that rages in the Muslim community is the relationship of women to the masjid. Again, a wide spectrum. Another debate is vegetarianism, a wide spectrum. So I think that there are places that we can, as a Muslim community, we can actually lead more from our actions and our decisions as opposed to just our voices. And I think that that's the power that we have as Americans, is that we have a little bit more of a leeway to actually do something collectively together, like a shared project, something together that I think we have yet to tap into.
Interesting.
I appreciate what Ibrahim is saying, but I wanted to go back to one thing Summer said about shared ends, and I actually don't agree. I don't actually think that all American Muslims have the same end in sight, actually, in terms of what it means to be American and a Muslim. And so I think that actually, so sometimes when people are drawing lines in the sand, they're drawing lines in the sand because they want different things for the community. And I think we should be, and I think we should be okay with that. I think that's okay. I think, there isn't, I know she said earlier too that people are uncomfortable with ambiguity, and I'm not sure people are uncomfortable with ambiguity, or that's where I would put it. But I do think that because we're a marginalized community that face a lot of discrimination, oftentimes people want to feel like we're bonded together, right? And we're going to do everything together. And even in the sort of prophetic tradition, right? This idea that the Muslims are one body, and if one part hurts, the other part hurts. And all those things I think are well and good. But at the same time, I think that because we're such a diverse community, people want different things, actually. And therefore, they have different strategies and different interpretations of the world. And I think that's something that we're going to have to learn how to be okay with as well.
And I just want to say that I actually absolutely agree with what Suad was saying, and that I didn't mean to imply that we have uniform ends. I think actually imposing uniformity on complexity or creating some kind of consensus out of complexity is completely insane.
Apt and concise.
I love that pause. I mean, that pause usually means that Malika thinks something completely different from the guest, but she's not going to say it.
No. It's interesting because the point that Suad raised and that Summer says she agrees with is this point that Marjorie on Twitter writes in. I think we have to get over faking a united voice in our communities and understand that folks have different interests. Ibrahim, you were nodding when Suad was speaking. You think that that's something that we need to get to?
I think this united thing is hilarious because this is the challenge. When we're a marginalized community in this country, we're an oppressed group, and any group in the United States that has been oppressed, that has been a smaller marginalized group, the minute that they've tried to actually get unified, that is the biggest fear of the sort of dominant society. Dominant society does not want oppressed groups to get unified. What do they do when oppressed groups get unified underneath a banner or a shared cause, they cut down their leaders, they break apart their groups, they infiltrate them. So we have to be very careful that we, how, at what cost do we want unity to be? Is unity basically, we're all going to just say, you know what, we're just going to bow our heads and do what we're supposed to do? Or are we going to actually hold this country accountable in a really strong way? And that might look like some senses of not unity the way that we would sort of maybe want it to be.
Zara?
Could we say cooperation? Like, is that the word? Because what I'm taken back to something that Ibrahim said earlier about the powers that be. And one of the conversations we have about care is that so often it is excluded, it is left out, it is tarred and feathered in the right-wing media, in the mainstream media by the FBI, because we are challenging the status quo, because we're suing the FBI, because we're working with the families of people who've been killed by the FBI, and we're attempting to build solidarity with others. Right. So like, and alhamdulillah, and this is why I choose to work at the Council on American Islamic Relations, because though it's growing and evolving, it is on the right side of so many of these civil rights issues. And so then when I see like this conversation about the selection of people who are able to sit at the tables with power, like I think of that as one of these divide and conquer tactics, right? Is to say, oh, like you're doing good work, well, we're going to exclude you, and then we're going to prop up people who are going to be excited about sitting here. And so maybe unity isn't the right word. I agree with everything that's been said about pursuing it as false. I think, just hold on a second really quick. I think cooperation, though, is important. Is if Summer wants to go to MLI, I can still cooperate with her on projects where we agree on, right? Like I don't need to boycott her, but at the same time, does cooperation require that I stay silent when I disagree with her on a strategy? I don't think so.
Summer, you made a really good point. You were reading my mind, because I always want to know who's the they when someone says they.
Yeah, because I hear this thing about respectability politics and people sitting, whether it's White House iftars, apparently lots of important foreign policy decisions are made at White House iftars.
Nothing's made there. Everyone fundraises off of that. Let's just be clear about what my opposition to it is and why I experience horizontal discipline in the community when I speak out against the White House iftar. My critique of it is that people feel accomplished for sitting with someone who is executing U.S. citizens, who is murdering Muslims abroad, who has deported more people than previous presidents, and then fundraise off of it as if though they've arrived. Oh, I'm so accomplished. Right. I sat with someone who said yes to murdering a U.S. citizen without due process. That's it. So sorry, I had to get that off my chest. It wasn't about you. No,
of course. And I hear you, except that I don't think anyone, I think every single one of us have had experiences, whether it's at the White House, whether it's in a work situation, whether it's in some other kind of organizational perspective, where we sit at the table with people we vehemently don't agree with on everything. And I think that the people who, to be clear, and to not sit at the table with people who we disagree with, or at least engage in a conversation on a face-to-face level. And I'm not even speaking about power right now. I'm just talking about the dynamics of just living requires you to speak to people you don't disagree with. And so if that's the issue, is that I don't agree with 100% of what you do, that means that, Zara, you and I would never talk to each other. And that gets us absolutely nowhere as human beings.
See,
but I think at the same time,
my opposition was to speaking.
Guess I'm having this thought here, because I'm loving eavesdropping in on this conversation, is that there will be another Paris attacks. Sadly, there will be another San Bernardino or something to that effect, where people are either writing or reading or hearing from people who are from Muslim communities, either around the world or around the United States. What should be the template when that happens? Because it's not quite right now. It doesn't make sense to me when I'm watching it. If I put Christian American in front of the guest that would be on, I was like, why would they say that? That's just weird. So if I put any other faith, it would be very strange. But for Muslim Americans, their expectations are really high. So if we had to rethink this scenario, it might take us a little while to work through it. What should happen?
I don't know if I think there should be a template. Because I don't think that, you need flexibility when these things happen. And I think you're right. I think there will be subsequent attacks, that Muslims will have to deal with. And I think that the way in which Muslims in the United States in particular are going to have to work through that is really by sort of, and I think going back to something Ibrahim said about doing sort of the work in their communities. because I think there's a documentary that I was affiliated with called New Muslim Cool, and in that documentary, a Muslim community gets raided by the FBI, right? Under it was there was a claim of one of the members of the masjid had smuggled guns, like that was the claim, and really the ACLU was involved, and it really was trumped up. But what happened is that the local community around that masjid, like they immediately came to the aid of that community, right, of that masjid community. They didn't accept what in the news and the press, everyone was sort of, kind of ginning up the sort of anti-Muslim, story around this. But the local community didn't buy any of it, right? Because they had relationships with that Muslim community and they could relate to, and they knew who they were. So they knew that whatever was going on there, it wasn't because the people in that community were actually doing something or intending to harm them, right? They knew that already. And so I think that the way we prepare for future events like this is by always being active in our local communities and having a presence. People know you're Muslim and know you're doing good things. And two, by trying to sort of do some of the work and attempting to change how the U.S. government treats Muslims, everyone, both domestically and internationally, right? Because what's behind a lot of this sort of quote-unquote extremism is not religious ideology, but it's issues of conflict and poverty, and war, right? And so I think there's a two-pronged approach here that isn't about a template, but it's about long, consistent, sort of activity and work. Like that's how Muslims should be responding, I think, to sort of future things that happen.
It's been really fascinating listening to all of you and hearing all those different insights. Thank you so much for being on the program today. Malika, what do you have?
I'll leave us with two tweets that sum up what many of our panelists said today. This is Iman, and she says, unity is a myth, but cooperation and collaboration is very doable. And Zainab says, before we can even think about a united voice, we need to begin having the real conversations with one another. And she uses hashtag dirty laundry. I think we started that today.
Well, you've got very fine dirty laundry. Thank you very much, Suad and Ibrahim and Summer and Zara. I think that might be taking the metaphor a little bit too far. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being on the stream. Appreciate your time. Take care.